Brian Bourke is the Chief Growth Officer at SECO Logistics. He's going to join me in a second, but what we're going to do to start off is one of Brian's colleagues, David Emerson in the UK, unfortunately was unable to join us here. And they had also brought one of their clients, Tom Beahon, the co-founder of Castor, is going to be a speaker as well. But we had to videotape them, so we're going to show this video first, just of David and Tom kind of telling the Castor story. If you're not familiar with their brand, really interesting, kind of premium, athletic, apparel brand. And where they have, done an excellent job at kind of developing, partnerships, with some of the sports league, Premier League, teams, along with Sir Andy Murray, the tennis player. And, they've really kind of built up a really nice following. So it's interesting to see kind of a digitally native, brand, again, as we've often talked about being global right out of the gate. And so again, with that, we're going to, run the video, and then I'm going to invite Brian up to join me on stage.
Hello, New York. I've always wanted to say that, and welcome, and hello to the Guelph community. I'm David Emerson. I am Senior Vice President of SECO e-commerce, and I'm very sorry that we're not there with you today. Tom and I were just talking about how much we would both love to be in New York today. But I'm sorry we can't be there, but we are very excited to share the story of Castor, a fantastic growing global brand. And with me today is Tom Beahon, who is the co-founder of Castor, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the business and the stories. So Tom, thanks for joining us, and maybe a bit of an introduction of you and your story, and then we'll move into the Castor story.
Thanks very much indeed for having me, Dave. Really excited to speak to you and the audience today. So yeah, my background originally, I don't know if it's a typical or not for an entrepreneur. I'm actually a failed professional footballer or soccer player, as our American cousins would say, by background. I grew up in Liverpool, or Merseyside in Liverpool, which you kind of have two choices growing up in Liverpool. It's either sport or music, and I was a marginally less bad sports person than I am a musician, so decided to go down that route. Played professional football at a fairly low level, so that the third tier of English football, and then went over and played in Spain. Luckily for me, my brother, with whom I co-founded Castor, was equally mediocre in his chosen sport of cricket. So between us, we kind of decided, let's start a business and at least attempt to be very good at something, rather than accept life as mediocre athletes.
But for the audience in New York, maybe you could tell us a bit about the Castor story, the beginnings, and really fast forward to where you are today, just at a high level.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, we've been very fortunate that the business has grown rapidly in the 5 years since we founded Castor. My brother and I grew up in Liverpool, both have a deep, genuine passion for sport. And again, it may sound cliched, Dave, but when we started the company, we kind of made the commitment to each other that we're going to throw ourselves into this, give it our absolute all. As we started to apply a bit more of an analytical focus to that initial passion or emotion, we thought about the global sportswear market. Of course, you've got huge global brands, some of the most iconic brands, not just in this market, but in any market globally. And of course, Nike, Under Armour, New Balance. And then I guess in Europe, Germany, or certainly founded in Europe, Germany, Puma, and maybe a couple of others. So huge brands, iconic brands, but very much mass market in their approach, purely by virtue of their sheer size and scale. And we thought, you know what, maybe there's an opportunity for somebody to be a slightly more premium alternative to those huge brands, and appeal to maybe a slightly more affluent, discerning customer demographic. and then compete by being digitally native, because this was 5 years ago when really e-commerce was just starting to ramp up, and we thought, okay, maybe that offers an opportunity for us to be a bit more agile, incorporate customer feedback into our product designs, and engage with customers maybe in a slightly different way to how brands have historically. So yeah, put those elements together. We thought that there could be a gap in the market here, and yeah, I mean, fortunately for us, fast forward 5 years, as I said, we've grown very quickly. We've had a couple of, well, more than a couple now, I guess, high profile partnerships that have really helped take the brand to the next level. So our first was with Andy Murray, the British tennis player. We then moved into team sports. We did the West Indies cricket team. Again, certainly in this country, in the UK, football is the number one sport by participation. So we really wanted to get into football. We did a partnership with Rangers, and they went on and won the Scottish Premier League title in the first season together. So as always in business, you need a little bit of luck. But I am a big believer in the adage of the harder you work, the luckier you seem to get. So yeah, those partnerships have really helped take us to the next level, and we're certainly at a very exciting stage now where we do have ambitions to become a truly global brand.
A good segue for my next question, Tom, was really about those global markets, and obviously closely aligned with the core sports that Castor plays in, forgive the pun, but where are those global markets for you in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of geography that you guys would see, particularly related to e-com focus? Where would you see those markets being?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting question, Dave, because so far, and I suspect this is the case with many businesses that go on the startup journey, if you like, where to begin with, certainly for us, it was very much demand led. So we'd just organically get some new customers in Australia, which was a really good market for us. The Middle East and Far East, so Saudi and Dubai, where sport and fitness is becoming ever more prominent. Japan, where consumers really like quality of fabric and the provenance of garments and attention to detail, which are all things that we take really, really seriously at Castor. Singapore, South Korea, there's maybe similar characteristics. So we've always naturally done kind of really well in those markets, but equally, and again, this is the entrepreneur and maybe the competitor in me, I don't think we've ever done it anywhere near as well as we could do. So that's when, as you get to a certain scale as a company and you maybe start thinking a bit more strategically, how do I want to target specific markets? Where is the right customer demographic that best fits what we think is right for Castor? Logistically and from an infrastructure perspective, which of course you know a lot about, Dave, is where you start to think where can we compete and be strongest. So I think all of those markets that I've mentioned, Australia, the Middle East and Far East, will be important for sure. We've got a number of high profile team partnerships in Australia with the Melbourne Storm and Sydney Roosters, who are probably fair to say 2 of the top 3 rugby league teams over in Oz, as well as a team called the West Coast Eagles, who are an Aussie rules football team. So that will be very exciting for us to go and leverage those partnerships further. But it would be remiss of me not to mention the US, because if you have ambitions to be a real global sportswear brand, as Castor does, you cannot do that without penetrating the US market in a serious way. So that for us is going to be a big focus in the months and years ahead. Not an easy challenge by any stretch of imagination, but you know, if it was easy, everybody would do it. But I think for us, because we have hopefully a differentiated product and a differentiated brand, there is scope for us to go and penetrate the US, and for me it's just such an exciting opportunity. So yeah, like I say, needs to be very well thought through and considered, not something to rush into by any stretch, but those plans have been underway for kind of 18, 24 months plus now, so we're looking forward to putting them into life.
But tell us a bit about your potential customers and the targeted customers for the e-com part of the business, in terms of what they look like, who are they, etc. You know, where are you guys on that?
Yeah, so do you know what, Dave? It's evolved is the honest answer. So at the business's inception, And I don't know if this is fair or unfair, but we used to call our target customer the Goldman Sachs man. That was kind of the nickname that we had for them internally. And that to us meant, so this is in pre-COVID when people used to go to the office. Hopefully we're all getting back there now. But it was a guy that would be, because again, we started off just as a men's only brand. We have since launched women's, but it was at the start a guy that would be in the office 6 a.m., 6 days a week, probably working until 7, 8, 9 p.m. But even with that kind of very hectic work schedule, would be in the gym kind of 4 or 5 days a week, and then running a marathon or competing in a triathlon at the weekend. Often training with a personal trainer at one of the premium gyms, like an Equinox, those kind of places. So they had higher levels of disposable income than the average. They were competitive by nature. I think anybody that is kind of successful in their career, more often than not, they've got that instinctive competitiveness in them. And they valued product quality, premium brands, and were happy to pay a bit more for that higher quality. So that was kind of our model customer, if you like, to begin with. And certainly we grew the business very quickly, targeting that individual, and it worked very, very well. And you've referenced it earlier, Dave, as we've kind of launched the team partnerships where you're selling to more, I guess, generic football, rugby, cricket, Formula One fans, that consumer base has evolved. But certainly the core Castor customer is still that guy that wants to pay, or is happy to pay a little bit more for a higher quality product, and really likes having that, certainly I would hope, the premium wings logo on his chest, that is going to be something that's different than the Nike swoosh or the Adidas three stripes. And people say, oh, that's interesting, what's that? And it kind of starts the conversation in the gym. Yeah. So I think, like any growing business, the customer base evolves, but you can never lose sight of who your core customer is.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I guess that Morgan, the Goldman Sachs kind of guy would have the expectation, like most consumers do these days, on delivery yesterday, as we call it, in terms of making sure that the end experience and what the consumer sees as the delivery experience is seamless and global, right?
Oh, 100%, Dave. You're absolutely right. And I mean, we have a joke internally that it's a Jeff Bezos world, and we're all just living in it, which is a joke. But I think there's some truth in that, isn't there? That Amazon have raised the bar so high for all of us. We can go and buy a pen or a stopwatch or whatever for $3 this afternoon. It'll be with us by the time we get home for dinner or kind of for breakfast tomorrow morning. So. And that's for everyday items. So if you compare that to a Castor product, which is premium, will cost a bit more than our larger, better known competitors, it's absolutely right and fair and to be expected that customers will expect a higher level of service and delivery. So, and equally, Dave, you only get one chance to make a first impression. If a customer buys from Castor for the first time and the product doesn't turn up, or it's been damaged in situ, probably you're not going to get a second chance for that customer to come back. So Absolutely. It's very difficult, but it's so important. Equally, when you get it right, you've got the opportunity to make that customer a customer for life, which for me is of course incredibly exciting. So it works both ways, but I think for brands that are at the front end of this change in the retail market, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Just changing directions slightly. Let's just talk about global kind of supply chain and how you're working with us, and obviously in terms of building that global infrastructure for inventory, and obviously as your markets become global, as they already are, a little bit about how we're working together in terms of those markets and those fulfillment centers to be in front of that demand, to make sure that every market you're in can get a day or two delivery promise.
I mean, the key word, Dave, for me on all of that is collaboration, which is such a high level word. But for me, what that means is you need to have a true partnership with whoever it is that you're working with or partnering with on these things, because when I will come and have a conversation with you or my brother will, we will be talking about what we're planning to do, not tomorrow or the next day, but 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the line. We can then have a genuinely strategic discussion about what that looks like, and then reverse engineer the actions that we need to take in the next 1, 2, 3 years in order to deliver that. And of course, we've been working with SECO now for a number of years, already launched a number of significant projects. Certainly as we launched our team sports business, where you can often be selling hundreds of thousands of units in a day when you launch a new shirt for some of our larger clubs. That was not something that we'd experienced as a business prior to those partnerships, and we had to work very closely with our partners at SECO in order to deliver that. The next step is, well, how can we do it in Europe? How can we do it in Australia? How can we do it in the US, as I referenced earlier? And it's only by having deep and genuine partnerships across the organization, not just at the highest levels or kind of C-level executives of each organization, but deeper than that as well. So the guys that are delivering on a day-to-day basis can pick up the phone and have a conversation and have that genuine desire to work together and make something work. That for me is where success comes from. So of course, these things are never easy. They're never seamless, but frankly, if they were, everybody would do it. And there's not many people doing what Castor is trying to do, or certainly growing at the rate that we are. So that commitment to a partnership and that spirit of collaboration for me is absolutely central to our success, and hopefully will continue to be so going forward.
As it relates to e-com particularly, any kind of pointers or tips that you'd like to share with the audience in terms of, please do this, but don't do this, etc. Those kind of thoughts?
Oh, how long have you got, Dave? Probably need we need to be in New York and have a couple of martinis, I think, to really get into the details of that one. But I think, certainly a couple of key ones for me would be e-com. We all get very excited about digital and technology, and of course that stuff is incredibly important and will continue to be so. However, people are it's people that run that technology and leverage it. So for any business, particularly, and it depends at what stage you are in your journey, of course, but getting the best people that you can possibly afford into the organization will be the definition, or will be the difference between success and failure, but then also how successful you are. So always over investing in people would be something that I would always give as a piece of advice. Not just on the digital and e-commerce side, albeit it's particularly important there, but across the organization. And probably secondly, Dave, would be, it's not meant to be easy. So when you have hardships and challenges and difficulties and setbacks, and you want to open a new distribution center in Holland or Melbourne, as you just said, and there's maybe some issues, or there's a new tax that comes in a local market, don't get disheartened, because it's meant to be difficult. See that difficulty as a challenge that others would not be able to overcome. So if you can, you're going to be in a fairly small group, and that's easy advice to give. And it's often a lot harder to follow when you're in the midst of a difficulty or crisis. But I always do try and remind myself of that, because it's not an easy thing to grow a global brand, particularly in this era of e-commerce. So if you're able to come over those challenges or overcome those challenges better than others, then you've got a really good chance of being successful. So not giving up, keeping going when things get tough is probably a good piece of advice that you can't go wrong with.
Have Brian join us on stage, please. And this kind of just quickly put some of this together. Just some of the new women's line that Castore has just recently launched, and the picture there with the two brothers, Phil and Tom Beahon, along with Andy Murray. Brian, welcome. Why don't you give a quick self-introduction, and then let's talk about Castore, and then to kind of take a bigger picture view of the industry and where we're at.
Sure. Brian Bourke, Chief Growth Officer at SECO Logistics. We have a global headquarters in Chicago, which is where I'm from, but we're in 40-plus countries, and we are a cross-border carrier, e-commerce fulfillment provider, and a traditional freight forwarder and white glove provider.
and we'll definitely kind of talk about how some of the SECO business, is really evolving. But let's talk about some of the, what Tom was saying, with Castor. Loved some of the comments around over-investing, in people, and you and I talked a little bit around, how. For them and for probably some other British, companies, they're not just digital natives; they're global natives. Kent and I did a study for MasterCard, a few years ago that kind of compared, U.S. versus UK retailers, and very similar kind of findings. Where again, the British, companies just immediately thought of, global, and how do we again, extend beyond our borders. What's been your kind of experience, when you think of, like U.S. versus, some brands from around the world?
Yeah, I mean, you look at, brands that are expanding in the U.S., oftentimes, whether it's Aritzia, with retail stores and or whether it's, the Boohoo's or the Sheins of the world, they're not U.S. companies. And I do think U.S. companies have been building international cross-border strategies on the back of domestic supply chains and domestic software, where international is it comes second. Whereas a lot of brands in Europe and in Asia and in Canada, they think about international from their first sale. And I think that has an impact because all these decisions that happen at the beginning create friction further down the line when you talk about international. So there's sometimes different challenges with helping U.S. brands expand globally because of that, and that's why I'm so glad you guys are doing this conference and you've set up this community, because these are the leaders. It's just your conference though should be like 10 times the size, right? Just based on what the addressable market is in the globe. It's too bad, but I think the U.S. is catching up finally.
And probably never before have supply chain issues kind of had a seat at the strategy table than now. Right, obviously, many brands, struggling with this, and that's where I thought it was great that Tom, just talked about the importance of the delivery experience, as a premium brand, and obviously, where the bar has been raised, expectations are, built upon, what Amazon, has done. What do you see, in terms of, what retailers kind of need to know to really deliver on that experience?
You have to get down to why do people buy cross-border e-commerce? Because people do make that decision whether they know it or not. And there's really only two reasons. Number one, you can't find what you're looking for in your home market, and so you find it on a website in another country. That's number one. Or number two, you can find what you're looking for in your home country. You're going to find it cheaper from someone else. Those are the only two reasons really that people buy cross-border. And so depending on which kind of category you're in, Castor definitely being on the exclusivity side of the equation because they have a premium brand and they haven't really launched yet in the US, but that is coming. And I'm sure they'll be signing deals with teams here in the U.S. Honestly, I think they're going to be like Under Armour from 15 years ago. But so keep an eye on them. But exclusivity is one thing. But their delivery experience. Let's say it is a Rangers fan here in the United States, which we do, right? So making the promise match the expectation, match the delivery experience. Those are all kind of key things, and that's been a challenge during COVID. Luckily, there's been a lot more patience, I think, from consumers. But I think that patience that we all earned because of how challenging it was to ship internationally has gone away. But if you're a brand that is actually competing, in a global marketplace, potentially with a marketplace, that's where you can. I'll give an example. How many times have you ordered something, right, and 2 months later it arrives and you forgot you even ordered it, right? Like this happens a lot with marketplaces. So what we do is we talk to these companies. If they pay a little bit more, right, they can get the product in 12 days to the door with a tracked service. And that's what the untracked, the DDU, delivery duty unpaid, those things are I think going away. And on top of that, you need to have clean data. You need to have product descriptions, classification set up correctly, no gaps in your data, because those loopholes that existed globally are closing in fast. And because of that, there's going to be more parcels held, and customs around the world are clamping down. And so all of these things are creating an environment where the consumer's expectations are changing, regulatory environments are changing, and of course, there's not a lot of passenger lift and capacity where we ship a lot of our parcels today. But luckily, Europe is opening up now, so we're going to see a lot more planes positioned on those routes on the transatlantic. Thank the Lord. And that's going to begin to really reduce those transit times. And that's where but as long as you can match the transit at checkout with what the experience is, and no one paying duties, a good returns experience as well. That's why we've developed a returns portal so people can print out labels at home. All these things, it's all about reducing friction. And in our world, there's more friction, there's more complexity, but if you have solutions to reduce friction, you're going to have happy customers.
So DDP has kind of now become a must-have, whereas before it was almost a fair bet, that you might sneak through some of those cracks by doing a DDU.
Yeah, I mean, you're Canadian, right? The 90% of the population within 90 miles of the U.S. border, and a lot of Canadians were accustomed to going down to a P.O. box on the other side of the border.
Yep.
And they're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
They expect the delivery to come to them regardless of where it's shipping from.
Yeah, exactly, dead on. Which, so, Tom, talked about partnerships and the importance of that. I mean, and that I think ties in really well with what you've told me how the SECO business is evolving. What are some of the more innovative or creative solutions or just added value services that you've really seen that has kind of evolved almost the SECO business model? Yeah,
so the evolution of SECO has been nothing short of monumental. Traditionally, we've been a freight forwarder since we started in 1976. Originally, we were just air freight, then we did ground, then we did ocean, customs brokerage, et cetera. But now we're evolving into become a parcel forwarder, and that's a big shift because we traditionally were a freight forwarder. Now we're moving, tens of millions of parcels a month, which is not something we were doing 10 years ago. But that took. I liked his quote there. It's like the harder you work, the luckier you get, right? So we were set up for this. We invested in this, but at the same time, that's also the trend, right, in the industry. Partnerships are key. Partnerships are key for us. I mean, heck, a lot of the vendors here, a lot of the sponsors we also work with. It's about creating an ecosystem. When you create an ecosystem and you make your systems extensible and you can make integrations happen fast, and you can work with partners and ask them. The most important thing, I think, with a partnership is what he described, where he's asking us. And I think that can happen more and should happen more. What would you do? How would you do it? One example is we were helping a brand expand into Australia, and again, they may pay per more to fly directly into Brisbane or Perth from LA, but ultimately they're paying less on the last mile because it's getting closer to the client at the injection site, and the product's getting to the customer faster. So actually they're paying less in transportation, and they're getting more sales because their promise date is getting closer and closer. So it's these types of things that, obviously this was pre-COVID because flights to Australia don't operate like that now, but that was an example where, we do have some ideas that we can implement that can really actually have an impact on that customer experience and actually can translate into increased sales. We have companies now that are asking us, where should I expand next, right? And these are key questions. These are questions we're having with Castor about, okay, where in Australia? Why do a fulfillment warehouse in Melbourne versus Sydney, right? The original ask was Sydney. Well, Melbourne's actually better, and here's why. It's partnerships that lead to those conversations that ultimately achieve win-win for both parties.
I think that's a theme we've heard, throughout from partnerships, but you kind of said it earlier. It's building out the ecosystems that allows, brands really to, again, have the speed to go to market, to really kind of seize those opportunities. Let's take a step back. You kind of alluded to this earlier, and we've talked about the lack of kind of capacity in the industry. And you said to me one time, that all eyes are on 2023.
Yeah.
Talk about that, and what you guys are seeing, from the industry at large.
Well, I know this is talking about cross-border shipping, but we have to talk about the inbound supply chain, right? It happened at lunch earlier, right? Like how could you sell product when you don't have inventory, right? So it's a big issue, and what I was sharing and what we've been talking about, including in the news and with our clients, it's not going to get back to quote unquote new normal until 2023. There's going to be capacity shortages. There's going to be issues, elevated rate levels into 2023 on the inbound supply chain. What is that going to do on outbound? If people have less inventory to ship. So these are dynamics that we're looking at because there's too many packages and not enough trucks, right? That's just a known thing. And carriers are not even taking on new customers. This is the world that we live in, but we've been accustomed to this. But that's why we're finding capacity with non-traditional carriers like Axle Hire and ACI here in the United States. ACI Logistics, when we inject parcels into the U.S. from Asia, in places like New York and LA, we actually hand it over to ACI, not some of the other integrators that you guys are familiar with. And it's, these types of challenges do create opportunities. Because as he said too, really eloquently, right? If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? So a lot of stuff is not easy right now. So it's actually a great opportunity to provide new solutions, try new things, and ultimately, beat out your competition if you're selling online.
The other thing we definitely wanted to talk about was some of the regulatory changes. We know there's lots going on. Cross borders is kind of in the crosshairs and in a lot of ways with regulators. And so let's start with Section 321. Why don't you explain what it is and why it's kind of an opportunity, for brands?
Yeah, I mean, you could always bring in parcels and clear them express, same day, for ages, right? But it was kind of only a few partners that could do that. So it was a very limited competition, and U.S. Customs opened up a pilot program. Thanks to our team actually here in New York, they were the innovators of this. Chris Jung over there, they saw the opportunity for what it was, and that is to apply, to be part of this pilot program, and to expand the universe to really streamline how parcels are coming into the U.S. so that we're actually helping on the compliance side. So U.S. Customs loves that. So this is actually, yes, regulatory issues are happening like in Europe where they're kind of reducing or eliminating de minimis altogether, right? But all these things are done with an objective in mind. And when you collaborate with customs, you can actually come up with solutions that are good for e-commerce and good for consumers and good for regulators. Section 321 is just that. So now it's kind of a lot more open universe where a lot more companies, especially marketplaces, but also direct-to-consumer brands, can bring in their goods into the U.S. As long as it's under $800 per person per day, these parcels can come in and get cleared right away, and then get transferred over to last-mile partners and providers. And so we're seeing volumes and demand of this service explode. And in fact, U.S. companies should be taking advantage of this more, not just the European brands and the Asian brands, which, by the way, they are in spades. But U.S. companies can do the same thing. Set up your supply chain. Of course, so there's some things people will want same day, next day, absolutely 2-day. But you can set up fulfillment in Hong Kong. You can set up fulfillment in Shenzhen and fulfill and send directly to your consumers. As long as they're willing to wait, 9 to 12 days and sometimes less if they're in major markets like Manhattan. Talk about a win-win-win. Duty-free, under $800, you're golden. Now we're even doing it for furniture. We're piloting this via ocean freight. So what's going to happen now, and what's happening all around the world, the closing in on the regulatory environment, postal operators, it's becoming a challenge for them to convert and pivot to this new world where product classifications, product definitions, HS codes are going to be required for everything, period, no matter where you're shipping. And postal operators aren't used to this. They need help. They're reaching out to partners like us. Partners, they're talking to the same companies they're exhibiting here that you're talking to. And that is a fundamental shift and change. And companies that take note of that and make sure their data is good and work with partners that can do Type 86, they're going to be the winners in the next 5 to 10 years in cross-border.
You know, and again, we could spend a lot more time kind of talking about, you know, where some of these regulatory changes really are, you know, creating both challenges and opportunities, you know, for a lot of brands. But I definitely wanted to kind of just, you know, be able to let you talk a little bit around, you know, some changes happening, you know, at SECO, and, you know, knowing that, you know, cross-border e-commerce has become, you know, such a priority with you guys. You know, what markets are you guys, you know, really watching these days? And, you know, feel free to share a little bit around kind of the new brand that you guys are building.
Yeah, so we are a sneak preview. Jim did make us promise that we would announce it here, so we are. We are launching a SECO e-commerce division, building on the success that we've already been investing in and building in. And that's really part of our evolution beyond just being a traditional freight forwarder to also being a parcel forwarder. But, you know, China and the US are still, you know, the biggest opportunities right now. But Europe closely behind. You know, and it's not just because, you know, the e-commerce penetration are different than what they are in places like Southeast Asia or Africa, which are actually showing tremendous growth, and we do service a lot of marketplaces and clients in those regions. But, you know, for cross-border and just between China, US, and Europe, that's where we see the biggest opportunity. That's where the most friction is being created. That's where better solutions can be deployed, and then ultimately help retailers navigate this new world where, again, product descriptions, product classifications, HS codes, that's going to be the name of the game. But consumers are still, they're still very savvy. They like to find what they want. Their direct-to-consumer brands that are digitally native are winning, and people can find you know, items that from companies in Korea that they absolutely love because they follow them on Instagram and they found them on Instagram, or now they're clicking on TikTok. The direct-to-consumer brands are winning. Retailers used to have all the power. Now consumers do. And the DTC brands are the ones that took note first. And there are no borders on the internet, right? There's no borders on the internet. Well, there are a few. We won't get into that. But there are mostly no borders on the internet. So companies that can position themselves to really take advantage of that and ship all around the world. I mean, you know, literally the world is our oyster. So those are the big markets, I think, for us. And, you know, there's places like Australia, Europe especially, not just the UK, but Europe. And then, yeah, Vietnam is one we're definitely watching now.
Yeah, interesting. You know, and that's where it was so great, just where we opened up, you know, with Tom, you know, from Castor, just to see kind of that attitude that they have, you know, as a DTC, you know, digital native, you know, brand that's kind of, you know, thinking global and all the opportunities there. Brian, I want to thank you very much, you know, for joining us, you know, here today. I know we could keep talking on all sorts of these things, but certainly, you know, if anyone, you know, has any questions, you know, for Brian, I'd kind of encourage them. I know we are already over our time here. So, Brian,
that was
thank
your
you very
fault,
much.
not me. I was you were asking me questions, and I answered them. I thank you for your time, though.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.